Some of the most famous words in history were never spoken by the people who supposedly said them. Kings, presidents, philosophers, scientists, and movie characters have all been dragged into one enormous quotation fraud. Today, we are exposing 30 legendary lines that sounded so perfect, everyone stopped asking for evidence. 1. "They may take our lives, but they will never take our freedom" did not survive from the real William Wallace. It came from Braveheart, where Mel Gibson shouted it with enough force to make historical evidence flee the battlefield. Wallace was a genuine Scottish rebel, and the wars against English rule were painfully real. But no trustworthy source preserves a speech that sounds suspiciously perfect for trailers, goosebumps, and slow-motion horses. The sentence was written by modern screenwriters who knew exactly what cinema needed: mud, rebellion, dramatic face paint, and one line powerful enough to bulldoze accuracy. So the quote is not medieval testimony. It is pure Hollywood metal, forged centuries later and polished until the public stopped asking questions. Wallace fought for Scotland, but this famous speech fought for box office revenue. 2. "A penny saved is a penny earned" is treated like Benjamin Franklin personally carved it onto the nation's wallet. He did express the idea, but not with those exact words. In Poor Richard's Almanac, Franklin wrote something closer to "A penny saved is 2 pence clear," which is less elegant, but financially sharper. His point was that avoiding an expense leaves money in your pocket and saves you from having to earn it again. The modern version compresses that logic into a cheerful slogan while quietly making the arithmetic less precise. Saving 1 penny is not literally the same event as earning one, no matter how often grandparents repeat it near a piggy bank. Franklin deserves credit for the lesson but not the polished wording. The original was smarter, clumsier, and therefore had no chance against a sentence designed for refrigerator magnets. 3. "Well-behaved women rarely make history" is constantly credited to Marilyn Monroe, apparently because every clever feminist line must eventually be assigned to a glamorous celebrity. The real author was historian Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, who wrote it in 1976 during a serious academic discussion. She was explaining that historical records often preserve women who caused conflict or broke social rules, while ordinary women living quieter lives disappear from the archive. It was not created for mugs, tote bags, dorm walls, or inspirational graphics covered in glitter. But the line escaped academia, became a powerful slogan, and then pop culture handed it to Marilyn because famous faces make convenient packaging. The irony is almost too perfect. A historian wrote about forgotten women, then another woman received the credit because she was more visually marketable. History did not merely misquote Ulrich, it demonstrated her argument in real time. 4. "Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer" is blamed on Sun Tzu so often that people assume ancient Chinese generals spent half their lives managing suspicious dinner invitations. The line is actually spoken by Michael Corleone in The Godfather Part 2. That film contains organized crime, family betrayal, and enough terrible personal choices to power several dynasties, but it is not a classical military text. Sun Tzu certainly wrote about deception, strategy, intelligence, and knowing your opponent, which is why the quote fits him so comfortably. It sounds old, dangerous, and just philosophical enough to impress people at business meetings. Yet no reliable ancient Chinese source gives us those words. This is not Sun Tzu offering timeless wisdom. It is Hollywood wearing silk robes and pretending to be ancient strategy. Somehow the disguise worked, and millions of quote pages saluted without checking the uniform. 5. "Let them eat cake" has spent centuries turning Marie Antoinette into the mascot of royal cluelessness. Unfortunately for the story, she almost certainly never said it. The original French version mentions brioche, a rich bread, not a decorated birthday cake arriving with candles and catastrophic timing. More importantly, similar stories were circulating before Marie Antoinette was even born, which creates a small but serious problem for the prosecution. Jean-Jacques Rousseau recorded a version years earlier as an example of aristocratic ignorance, without naming her. Later, revolutionary propaganda needed a luxurious villain in silk, powder, and diamonds, so the sentence was attached to the perfect face. Marie Antoinette received a quote she did not create and then paid reputational interest on it for generations. History found an old rumor, gave it a famous queen, and sold the package as eyewitness testimony. 6. The end justifies the means is how people summarize Niccolo Machiavelli when reading his actual work feels inconvenient. He never wrote that exact sentence. In The Prince, he discussed how rulers acquire power, preserve authority, manage appearances, and sometimes choose morally ugly actions in unstable political conditions. His arguments were more complicated, more cautious, and far less suitable for printing beneath a photograph of a chessboard. Later readers crushed all that nuance into one brutal formula and used it as proof that Machiavelli was history's personal consultant for villains. The irony is excellent. A writer obsessed with political image became trapped inside an image created by other people. He is now blamed for a slogan he never used because the slogan is simpler, darker, and much easier to remember. Machiavelli studied ruthless efficiency, then suffered the most ruthless simplification imaginable. 7. Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves is regularly assigned to Confucius because any sentence involving morality, consequences, and a serious tone apparently gets shipped directly to ancient China. There is no dependable Confucian source for it, and the message does not strongly resemble his usual teaching. Confucius focused on virtue, family duty, social harmony, proper conduct, and moral self-improvement. He was not running a motivational clinic for dramatic swordsmen with revenge schedules. Versions of the saying appear as later proverbs, and are often linked in Western culture to Japanese tradition, though the precise origin remains uncertain. What is clear is that Confucius did not leave us this line. People heard something old-fashioned and wise, then handed it to the oldest wise man they could remember. Historical attribution sometimes resembles a drunk librarian placing every mysterious book on the same shelf. 8. Gordon Gekko did not simply say, "Greed is good." That is the fast food version culture extracted because long sentences interfere with catchphrases. In Wall Street, he actually says, "Greed, for lack of a better word, is good," then launches into a polished defense of greed as the engine of progress, ambition, and evolution. Those extra words matter. They reveal a smooth corporate predator carefully dressing selfishness in the language of efficiency and innovation. Over time, the speech was reduced to 2 explosive words because society prefers its moral decay, compact and printable. The shorter version became a symbol of an era fascinated by money, confidence, and expensive surfaces. So the quote is not completely fake, but the famous form is a cropped mutation. A whole villainous argument was compressed into a bumper sticker, then released into the economy without adult supervision. 9. History is written by the victors is attached to Winston Churchill with such confidence that the quote practically arrives holding a cigar. It certainly sounds like Churchill. He won a war, wrote enormous amounts of history, and understood perfectly how power shapes memory, reputation, and national myth. But there is no solid evidence that he invented or even used that exact phrase. Similar ideas appeared much earlier in 19th century political writing and in older reflections on conquest and historical memory. The attribution survives because it matches Churchill's public image almost too well. People did not need proof. They had tone, costume, and a famous winner standing nearby. The joke writes itself. A saying about powerful people controlling history became famous through a false historical attribution. The quote did not merely describe the problem. It volunteered as a live demonstration. 10. The death of one man is a tragedy. The death of millions is a statistic, is usually placed in Joseph Stalin's mouth because the sentence is cold enough to freeze the furniture. But the evidence is weak. Similar wording appeared elsewhere in 20th century European writing and satire, while no dependable Stalin source confirms the famous version. This does not rescue Stalin's reputation. Reality already supplied enough terror without hiring imaginary dialogue to make him look worse. The line survived because it captures something genuinely disturbing. Individual suffering feels personal, while enormous numbers can become abstract and emotionally numb. Attaching it to a dictator makes the idea even more powerful, so people accepted the attribution without demanding paperwork. History looked at one of its worst monsters and decided the documented record still needed a screenwriter. Apparently, even mass murder was not dramatic enough without a perfect closing line. 11. I am not afraid. I was born to do this appears under Joan of Arc's name whenever somebody needs medieval courage in a modern font. But Joan never left us that polished sentence. It is a contemporary motivational paraphrase built from the heroic image later generations created around her. Her authentic words, preserved mainly through trial records, are more religious, more cautious, and much less engineered for posters. That does not make her less impressive. She was a teenage peasant who claimed divine guidance, entered war, influenced a kingdom, and then defended herself during a deadly political trial. The truth already sounds unbelievable. Yet modern culture wanted all that courage compressed into one clean English slogan, so it manufactured one and attached it to a 15th century French girl. History gave us extraordinary nerve. The internet gave it branding, dramatic lighting, and merchandise. 12. In the end, it's not the years in your life that count. It's the life in your years is regularly presented as Abraham Lincoln wisdom, usually when someone needs inspiration with no historical complications. Lincoln did not say it. The phrase seems to have gained attention through a 1947 promotional booklet connected to a company selling books about him. That is a remarkably efficient piece of advertising. Invent a noble sentence, borrow a dead president, and let national memory handle distribution. The line sounds believable because it is balanced, solemn, moral, and smooth enough to imagine carved into stone. Yet it does not appear in Lincoln's speeches, letters, or recorded conversations. So one of America's most famous presidents became an unpaid spokesman for a commercial slogan decades after his death. Apparently, the afterlife still has terrible labor protections. 13. George Washington did not say, "Firearms stand next in importance to the Constitution itself." The quote appeared in modern political culture long after Washington was dead, and therefore unable to object. No trustworthy version exists in his letters, speeches, official papers, or the enormous body of surviving material connected to him. Washington wrote frequently, and a statement that thunderous would not have vanished behind a cabinet for 2 centuries. The sentence survives because it sounds patriotic, solemn, and carved from solid oak by an eagle carrying legal documents. It also gives modern arguments the emotional weight of the founding era without requiring any inconvenient 18th century context. Attaching present-day slogans to the founders has become a national hobby. This is not Washington speaking from the Revolution. It is later ideology using his portrait as a historical ventriloquist dummy. 14. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it, is one of Voltaire's most famous quotations, except Voltaire never said it. The line was written in 1906 by his biographer Evelyn Beatrice Hall. She was summarizing his attitude toward free expression, not presenting his actual words. Hall later clarified this, but the sentence had already escaped wearing Voltaire's identity like a stolen coat. It spread because it perfectly expresses the version of Voltaire people wanted: witty, principled, fearless, and slightly superior to everyone in the room. The problem is that a brilliant summary is still not a direct quotation. So millions of people remember Hall's sentence as the voice of an Enlightenment philosopher, while Hall herself became nearly invisible. This is historical identity theft with powdered wigs, excellent grammar, and no apparent possibility of arrest. 15. L'État, c'est moi, meaning, I am the state, is the ultimate Louis XIV quote, because nothing summarizes absolute monarchy quite like a king claiming to be the entire government. Historians, however, generally doubt he ever said it. No strong contemporary source records the line. and it likely emerged later through political criticism and dramatic retelling. The quote feels believable because Louis centralized royal authority, turned court life into a performance, and built Versailles like ego had discovered architecture. Later writers could compress that entire system into one magnificently arrogant sentence and trust the public to do the rest. The words may be false, but the character casting was perfect. That is why the quote survived. History often confuses emotional accuracy with factual accuracy, then acts surprised when the audience remembers the slogan and forgets the evidence. 16. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar sounds like the perfect joke for Sigmund Freud to make about his own obsession with hidden meanings. Freud spent his career discussing buried desires, symbols, dreams, repression, and the alarming possibility that your mind is never quietly minding its own business. A line saying that some objects have no secret meaning would be an excellent moment of self-awareness. Unfortunately, there is no reliable evidence that Freud ever said it. The quote became popular because it is too neat and too funny to resist. People wanted Freud to parody Freud, so culture generously wrote the joke for him and added his name later. The result is beautifully ironic. A sentence warning us not to search for hidden meanings may itself exist because people projected a clever hidden meaning onto Freud. That is almost suspiciously appropriate, even by psychoanalysis standards. 17. George Washington's famous confession, "I cannot tell a lie," comes from the cherry tree story, which children are usually told before they learn to ask who witnessed it. The tale was invented by Parson Weems, an early Washington biographer who understood that moral legends sell better than complicated human beings. In his version, young George cuts down a cherry tree, admits everything immediately, and becomes honesty itself, wearing small shoes and carrying an axe. It is patriotic, heartwarming, and entirely fictional. Weems was building national character, not documenting an event. He wanted Washington to seem less like an ambitious politician and more like a flawless moral father for the new country. America asked for a saint, and Weems delivered one through creative writing. The tree was imaginary, the confession was invented, and the branding campaign was spectacularly successful. 18. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication is so perfectly suited to Leonardo da Vinci that people can practically see it written beside a graceful machine sketch. But Leonardo did not leave us that line. Its modern popularity is tied to Apple advertising in the late 1970s, when marketers used it to make sleek computers feel like Renaissance philosophy. Leonardo genuinely valued proportion, clarity, elegance, and intelligent design, which is why the sentence fits him like expensive tailoring. Yet, fitting a person is not the same as being spoken by that person. No reliable source shows Leonardo writing those exact words. This supposed pearl of Renaissance wisdom is actually modern branding soaked in historical perfume. Advertising looked at one of humanity's greatest geniuses and decided his reputation could help sell minimalism. Then the public admired the quote, ignored the receipt, and gave Leonardo full credit. 19. That government is best which governs least is often handed to Thomas Jefferson because neat anti-government slogans look very comfortable beneath a portrait of a founding father. But the line is not securely his. Its most famous early appearance is connected to Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience, and even Thoreau was echoing political ideas already circulating before him. Jefferson certainly warned against concentrated power and spoke constantly about liberty, restraint, and republican government. That makes the attribution believable, but believable is not evidence. The exact sentence emerged from a later political context and was gradually pushed backward into Jefferson's mouth. Modern politics loves historical support, especially when the historical figure cannot interrupt. So a tidy slogan was dressed in 18th century clothing and introduced as Jeffersonian wisdom. The costume looked convincing, and almost nobody checked the label. 20. Good artists copy, great artists steal is repeated as Pablo Picasso's personal permission slip for creative robbery. The exact wording, however, cannot be securely traced to him. The larger idea belongs to a long artistic conversation about imitation, influence, borrowing, and transforming existing work until the fingerprints become stylish. T.S. Eliot wrote something similar about immature poets, imitating and mature poets stealing, though his argument was more complicated than the quote people now repeat. Picasso may have expressed related thoughts, but the modern sentence looks like a later blend polished for maximum swagger. Naturally, it was assigned to Picasso. He seemed bold, disruptive, and perfectly capable of turning theft into artistic philosophy before breakfast. Culture essentially designed a quote to match his reputation, then handed him the bill. Even the attribution was borrowed, altered, and presented as original, which is almost too appropriate. 21. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results is attached to Albert Einstein because every compact sentence sounds more valuable when paired with wild hair and theoretical physics. There is no solid evidence Einstein said or wrote it. He was a physicist, not a motivational speaker producing calendar wisdom between equations. Versions of the idea appeared later in recovery programs, self-improvement writing, and popular culture, long after Einstein had become the universal symbol for genius. The quote survived because it is sharp, useful, and just judgmental enough to make the speaker feel intelligent. Adding Einstein's name gave it scientific authority without the inconvenience of science. So this was not a revelation from the man who transformed modern physics. It was generic wisdom receiving a luxury upgrade. Someone stapled Einstein's face onto the packaging, and the internet treated it like peer review. 22. Trust in God and keep your powder dry is linked to Oliver Cromwell because the line sounds old, Protestant, practical, and slightly explosive. That combination fits him so well that people rarely pause to ask whether the evidence does. The famous wording does not appear in dependable records from Cromwell's lifetime. It enters English print much later, during the 19th century, while Cromwell had died in 1658 and was unavailable for clarification. The sentence endures because it balances faith with common sense. Pray sincerely, but do not become so spiritual that you forget the ammunition. It is memorable, compact, and perfectly suited to a military leader with a severe expression. Unfortunately, historical attractiveness is not documentation. The quote may be excellent advice, but Cromwell's ownership papers are missing. The archive is not confirming the story. It is standing quietly in the corner and looking uncomfortable. 23. Be the change you wish to see in the world is connected to Gandhi in the way instant soup is connected to actual cooking. The basic ingredients are recognizable, but the final product has been heavily processed. Gandhi did speak about moral example, personal discipline, and the relationship between individual behavior and social transformation. Yet the modern quote compresses those demanding ideas into a soft, inspirational slogan suitable for office walls and notebooks. Gandhi's real message required sacrifice, responsibility, and sustained action. The popular version lets you feel revolutionary while reorganizing your desk. It is concise, flattering, and extremely easy to sell, which explains why it replaced the more complex original thought. So the sentence is not a verified Gandhi quotation. It is a motivational paraphrase put through a branding machine until every rough edge disappeared and only the pleasant aftertaste remained. 24. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing has followed Edmund Burke for so long that people assume it came engraved on his furniture. No reliable Burke text contains that exact sentence. He did write about civic duty, moral responsibility, political courage, and the dangers of public passivity, which gave later paraphrases enough material to grow. Eventually, the summary hardened into a quotation, and Burke's name became permanently attached. The line survives because it is powerful, morally clear, and incredibly convenient whenever someone wants to condemn apathy without giving a longer speech. Its spirit may resemble Burke's thinking, but the wording is not his. History took a broad principle, tailored it into a perfect sentence, and introduced it as direct testimony. By the time the evidence objected, the quote already had posters, speeches, and a much better publicist. 25. If voting made any difference, they wouldn't let us do it, is often credited to Mark Twain, which feels almost lazy considering how many fake quotes he already carries. Twain wrote brilliantly about politics, corruption, hypocrisy, and human foolishness. He did not need strangers donating extra cynicism to his collection. The saying has also been linked to Emma Goldman and Robert S. Borden, although its exact origin remains disputed. What is clear is that Twain is not a dependable source. His name became a storage unit for every witty, gloomy, rebellious sentence that arrived without paperwork. The line remains popular because it is compact, provocative, and perfect for sounding politically exhausted before breakfast. But attaching it to Twain is historical recycling at its most casual. At this point, if a quote is clever and slightly dangerous, someone has probably already tried to make him responsible. 26. If you can dream it, you can do it, is printed under Walt Disney's name as though he said it while personally inventing inspiration. The wording is not reliably his. Its popularity is usually traced to Disney Company material created after his death, including language written by employees shaping the optimistic image of places such as Epcot. Walt Disney genuinely spoke about imagination, persistence, ambition, and turning ideas into reality. That broad spirit is authentic. The famous sentence, however, sounds more like polished corporate motivation than a documented remark from the founder. The company became so skilled at speaking in Walt's voice that people eventually stopped checking whether Walt had spoken at all. Brand identity put on the man's clothes, walked into public memory, and was accepted without identification. Apparently, a corporation can impersonate its founder if the slogan is cheerful enough. 27. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once sounds ancient and heroic, because William Shakespeare designed it to sound ancient and heroic. The line appears in Julius Caesar, where Shakespeare's Caesar delivers it before the assassination. There is no evidence the real Roman dictator ever said those words. Ancient political leaders occasionally spoke well, but they did not naturally communicate in polished English verse written 16 centuries later. Shakespeare transformed historical figures into magnificent speech machines, which made excellent theater and terrible source material. Over time, the line became attached directly to Caesar because his name was on the play, and nobody wanted to interrupt the drama with citation rules. Stage dialogue was promoted into historical testimony by sheer charisma. Apparently, once a sentence sounds immortal, the actual author becomes a minor administrative detail. 28. And yet it moves, is what Galileo supposedly muttered after being forced to reject the claim that Earth moves around the sun. The scene is perfect. An old scientist publicly defeated, then quietly slipping one last act of defiance past religious authority. It is also almost certainly a later legend. The story appears well after Galileo's trial and lacks strong contemporary support. It became popular because it transforms a complicated conflict involving theology, politics, science, personalities, and institutional power into one clean cinematic ending. Galileo did defend heliocentrism, and the Inquisition did prosecute him. Those parts are real. The famous whisper, however, looks more like romantic storytelling than verified history. Even the history of science wanted a heroic final line, so later generations wrote one, dimmed the lights, and let the myth walk out to applause. 29. Et tu, Brute, is the most famous betrayal line in history, largely because William Shakespeare understood how to make emotional damage sound elegant. In Julius Caesar, the words strike at the perfect moment as Caesar recognizes Brutus among his attackers. The real Caesar's final words are uncertain. Ancient writers disagree, and some accounts suggest he said nothing, which is understandable when several senators are actively converting you into a political warning. Another tradition claims he spoke Greek and said something like, "You too, child?" That sounds very different from the polished Latin phrase repeated whenever a coworker steals someone's lunch. Shakespeare's version was simply too good to lose. Theater entered the historical record, took the best seat, and refused to move. Once et tu, Brute became cultural shorthand for betrayal, reality had no chance of getting the role back. 30. A woman's best weapon is poison is attached to Lucrezia Borgia because history has always enjoyed turning powerful women into elegant monsters. She did not say it. The line grew from later literary and theatrical portrayals, especially 19th century works such as Victor Hugo's Lucrezia Borgia, which emphasized murder, scandal, intrigue, and the irresistible image of a beautiful woman carrying a hidden vial. By then, Lucrezia's reputation had already been damaged by generations of political propaganda and sensational rumors surrounding the Borgia family. Many accusations were exaggerated, distorted, or created by enemies who found scandal more useful than accuracy. Writers inherited the legend and decorated it with better dialogue. The quote survives because it summarizes the fictional Lucrezia perfectly. History gave her a notorious family, literature gave her poison, and the public remembered the costume long after the evidence left the theater. Now the dangerous question, which famous quote did we miss, and who has been falsely getting credit for it? Drop the quote and the supposed speaker in the comments. We want the biggest historical imposters, not the obvious ones. If this video exposed at least one lie you believed, hit like and subscribe, because history's fake dialogue problem is much worse than 30 quotes.